Greetings from Charleston, South Carolina. So we decided to take a road trip as a family, and we drove up from South Florida to Charleston, and the distance is about 600 miles or so, give or take. And we had a lot of discussion about whether we should take the Tesla or whether we should take the gas-powered car. With gas prices where they are, certainly the Tesla was a more efficient way to go. But there were a couple of reasons that we ultimately chose not to take the Tesla. And the first had to do with the space inside. Especially the cargo space. We were picking up my son on the way in college, and he had some stuff he wanted to take with him. And on the way back, we're going to take some stuff home from his college back to the house. And there was the four of us riding in the car, and those were the biggest concerns. The other secondary concerns were that it's about a 10-hour trip by car, and so you have to gas up once along the way when you're driving a gas-powered vehicle. But when you're driving the Tesla, you have to actually we would have had to make 5 stops. And I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail, what the actual charging would have looked like, because I had mapped it all out and figured out what we were going to do or what we were going to need to do in order to make this trip. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in this video. Given that we were considering taking the Tesla with us and going all the way to Charleston from South Florida, I wanted to do a little route planning and a little theoretical sort of analysis of what it would take to get there. I just wanted to see what it would take. Now, I have no sense of range anxiety, but I just wanted to know where the chargers were relative to where we were going, and sort of especially at the destination to know what options we had available to us. So what we wanted to do was head up from South Florida, go through Gainesville, spend the night in Jacksonville, and then go on to Charleston. We were technically staying in Mount Pleasant, which is just outside of Charleston, but you get the idea. So we were looking at what routes could we take to get there. And what I realized was it would take a couple of stops on the way to get to Gainesville, as it always does, 1 charge in Gainesville, and then probably 2 other charges to get all the way up the coast. Now, something I noticed with a better route planning app, you can go in and you can change whether you want to have fewer stops or shorter legs, and you can kind of adjust your mileage a little bit. And the interesting thing is Tesla has put in more supercharging stations in their network along the route. So it used to be there was only 2 of the service stations along the Florida Turnpike that had Tesla superchargers. Now they all do. So the distance you can travel and the things you can do change a little bit, so there's a little variability in how you actually make the trip. So as I adjusted this a little bit, I could see that I could stop a little less frequently, but it would still take multiple charges to be able to get there. And if I change it again, it would still come back a little differently. Now, what I was realizing as I was looking at this was there are really basically 5 charging stops you have to make on the way up. You could maybe make it 4. I don't know if the car would handle that or not, but maybe you could. And this is where the rub came in. When we started talking about actually stopping 5 times and adding another hour and change, hour and a half or so onto the trip, that became the complicating factor. Now the trip became that much longer. And talking to a few friends of mine who happen to own Teslas and sort of their reactions to taking longer road trips and having to stop several times, I have one friend who was very specific. She said her husband loves his car, doesn't mind stopping, but she hated it. And there was a fear that with my wife, she might actually hate stopping that much. So that was a consideration that went into all of this. Now, the other thing I did was I went in and I looked at the destination because I wanted to know what charging options we'd have once we got there. So if I take away some of the other charging types just to see what's out there, it gets a little bit cleaner on the map. So we'll go ahead and just make a couple of changes here. And as you can see, I've cleaned it up so I can really see where the superchargers are and see what other kind of charging options there are. So we were staying over in Mount Pleasant over here, and I see that there's something at the town center, which might be useful. So that's pretty cool. And there's something at the Town Place Suites, which also might be useful. So as I click around, I see some different places where I can charge, and that's kind of helpful in some way. Now, as I was doing my planning, I was thinking, well, could I charge there? How would it work out? How good is this? What's the location look like? Would it be easier to drive the 15 miles to the supercharger? Now, if there was some sort of a charging destination at the hotel we were staying at, it would have been that much easier. But there wasn't. So that left me with the options of trying to decide on something else that I might do. And that's where I started thinking about where else I could go. So knowing all of that, I also went to the Tesla site to see where all the superchargers were. I could have done this in my car, of course, but I wanted to just do it in sort of real time while I was thinking it through. So I was kind of laying around in the evenings and just thinking about what would it take to actually get there. So as I played around, I see that there's many more superchargers. As I said, they're all the way up and down the coast now. There are many more than there used to be. So it's actually easier to charge than it has been in the past. So no problem there. Now, I know that I was going to go through Gainesville, and I wanted to go ahead and grab onto the Supercharger that was there because that was going to be the last stop I'd have before I started making my way out of the state. So I could charge there, then head up into Jacksonville and make my way up. So we're good. Everything's easy from there. I've done this route before. That's an easy one. But going up the coast, how far up was I going to get? And that's where I started to think about where are the Superchargers. And you can see there's many of them along the way, perfectly placed so that it would be easy to get charging. No problem. And then as I kind of drew in the map a little bit to think about where these other Superchargers were, I see that we wound up at a couple of different places around, and that's a little bit south of where we were. And then we went up a little further, and this is the actual place, the Town Place Suites. That's what the Supercharger looked like. It was at the hotel. And I suppose, in theory, I could have asked if I could have used it. The Mount Pleasant Town Center, which was about a mile walk from where we were, would have been an easy place to charge. So that's a good thing. That could have actually worked out really well to my advantage. But again, I'd have to walk the mile, leave the car for several hours, and then come back and get it. So as I thought about it, and I looked at the number of charges I'd have to make, making 5 stops on the way up and adding an extra hour and change to my trip really didn't seem worthwhile. It felt like my wife was going to probably say that she wasn't thrilled with the trip. So I really wanted to not do that if I could help it. And then I did a little math just to figure out what it would cost. We actually spent $180 on gas. For electric, we drove 1,325 miles. The standard rate is about 0.34 kilowatt hours per mile. That's how you use it. And at 25 cents per kilowatt hour, that would have meant we would have spent a total of $113 on electric, which is really not a great savings over the 180. So really, there was no point in trying to save money by not using gas. And this really has nothing to do with the story, but I just thought this was interesting. We passed by this one garage where they had this safety warning outside about Chevy Bolt EVs because of the fires they've had with them. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting little thing. I hadn't seen that anywhere before. So that's the story of why we didn't take the Tesla. And it's kind of unfortunate. I was really looking forward to taking a road trip, but our reasons were not unreasonable in that sense. So it made sense to go ahead and drive the ICE vehicle and bring it up. So with that out of the way, there was one other thing that caught my attention I just wanted to mention to you. And this has to do with an article. Well, it was actually a series of a questionnaire that was sent to car dealerships, asking them what they thought about moving to EVs. And the dealerships had an interesting response, and their response was, there's no way this can happen. It was like 75% of the dealerships that were polled said, no way can we get to 50% EV by 2030, within 8 years. And they gave a lot of reasons for it, and it was a lot of blank stares and hyperbole, and they said the things you think you would expect them to say. But the reality is, when you look at the way they're switching to EVs, each of the major car companies is looking to spin off a separate division to create the electric vehicles, except for GM, which is going to move to 100% electric, and it's just telling their dealerships, sorry, if you don't want to move to electric, you don't need to be a dealership anymore. So the move is happening regardless. But what dealerships object to is the very simple fact that most of the money that the dealerships make is on service. They make more money on service than they do on the sale of cars. The sale of cars nets them some amount of profit, but remember that they have a lot of inventory tied up for a period of time when they're buying it through the system, and they actually wind up holding a lot of costs there. They do make money on it, but they don't make as much as you think. Where they make their money is actually on the servicing of the vehicles, because they actually make true profit on that. So that's really where the problem is for them, because they know that they're going to lose money on the fact that these electric cars don't need as much service as traditional ICE engines. So it's an interesting prospect for them because their revenue stream will have to be different. So I just thought that was interesting, and I just wanted to point it out to you. It was kind of an interesting little thought.